Don't want to put it too far away, because hopefully you can go play with it again.
Yeah, look at that bad dog.
Oh, yeah.
You could have come and watched baseball with me.
Wow, I got 1 page left.
That's what's fun about them, because you can see them when you throw them out on the
So
wall.
that's all we're doing.
Well, listen,
That's all.
if I only have 1 page
that
left in
what
the
you
notebook,
need?
then I
No,
just
no,
have to
I-
hear
Oh, that I don't know.
Yeah, it's getting real.
No real can be okay.
Yeah, he's in
Yeah.
the ESD budget committee. As soon as that is over, he'll. All right, welcome. We're coming to the budget meeting of the Greater Albany Public School Board. We'll call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Still a lot.
Flag's in the corner.
Yeah.
All right, there it is.
Not very well unfurled.
No, you're fine. You're okay. You're okay. It's all good. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, thank you very much. That is going to move us into letter C, and that is the election of the Budget Committee Chair. So I'll hear nominations for Budget Committee Chair.
I would nominate Mr. Norman. He did this last year here, and we're still here, and there's still some money in the bank. So, Mr. Norman, if elected, will you serve?
Yes, I will.
I would second that. Any further nominations? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. Congratulations, Mr. Norman. The rest is yours.
You want to trade places with me here?
Sure, and I apologize, I will be coughing through the meeting this evening, but I'm not communicative, so don't worry.
Thanks again, Chris.
All right, so next up is the approval of the committee meeting minutes from April 6th. Hopefully you guys all had a chance to review those. Are there any changes or edits? All right, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Make a motion to approve the Budget Committee minutes from April 6th, 2022.
All right, it's been moved. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we are moving on to the budget message from our superintendent, Superintendent Saxon.
Thank you. I'm going to read the budget message tonight. Acting as the interim superintendent for the Greater Albany Public Schools, GAPS, for the 21-22 school year has been both an honor and a challenge. One specific challenge has been gaining an understanding of and managing the budget through a dynamic and unprecedented era of public education in Oregon and in GAPS. The two preceding budget years were significantly impacted by the COVID epidemic and therefore did not offer a typical budget map to follow. Additional income in the form of high school success funding, which is ballot measure 98, student investment account, the SIA funding, and also the Elementary and Secondary Emergency Relief Fund, ESSER, also generated an atypical situation. And finally, the turnover of staff in the Business and Human Resources Department caused a loss of historical context for this work. Fortunately, as has been typical over the course of this year, talented and dedicated staff in our district stepped up and completed this important task. In this instance, their effort created this budget document. In other instances where staff have gone above and beyond expectations, students have received excellent instruction, facilities have been upgraded, food served, buses driven, offices managed, and much, much more. All GAPS staff deserve a special thank you for their excellent work through the challenges of this year and the previous two. The budget document is an important tool used by the board and administration to prepare for the future. It's more than just a spending plan. It's a means of communicating the board's priorities to the GAPS district community. This document was prepared keeping in mind the GAPS mission statement, building bridges to lifelong learning and brighter futures. Utilizing this mission allows us to more successfully budget a plan as opposed to just planning a budget. The proposed budget and budget message have been prepared in compliance with Oregon law, ORS 294.388. The budget message is being delivered to the Budget Committee as prescribed in ORS 294.403 and is submitted to the Budget Committee and patrons of the Greater Albany Public School District. And revenue assumptions. The Greater Albany Public School District is projecting general fund resources of $119,862,602 for the 2022-23 school year. This is a 6.3% increase from the 2021-22 budget. The increase is primarily due to the allocation model set forth by the legislature in their 2021 session, which delivered 49% of the state school fund for the 21-22 school year and 51% of the funds for the 22-23 school year. This allocation creates an increase of nearly 4%. In addition, GAPS is budgeting for 50 additional students next year after receiving important information from our demographer, Flow Analytics. The actual prediction is an increase of nearly 90 students in the district, but Flow Analytics warns that data is less reliable than typical due to the influence of COVID on enrollment. Prudent caution has us utilizing the number of 50 additional students for budgetary purposes. Resources include an estimated beginning fund balance of $11,400,000. The beginning fund balance consists of funds that are available at the end of fiscal year 21-22 for use in 22-23. About 29.3 of the state school fund grant total fund formula revenue comes from local property tax base and other local sources. The remaining 70.7% comes from or through the state of Oregon. In addition to the general fund state school fund grant allocation, GAPS receives two other significant ongoing state revenues. Measure 98, the high school success funding, will be relatively flat at approximately $2.4 million, which supports just over 20 FTE providing services in grades 8 through 12. GAPS Students Investment Account, SIA, funding will increase about 3% in 22-23 to about $7.33 million. Programming in SIA is based on outcomes from an extensive community process and supports 49 FTE throughout our system. Expenditure assumptions. Expenditures for personnel make up approximately 82% of the total budget program costs for instruction, support, and administrative functions. Both salary and associated payroll costs have risen over the years. These increasing costs continue to be one of the most pressing concerns for our district as we attempt to balance student needs with the provision of a realistic compensation package for our staff. Premiums for district health insurance plans have increased over the years, consistent with state and national trends, and these trends will likely continue. The cost of medical services and insurance are a state and national issue that cannot be controlled at the local level. Proposed changes to the 21-22 and 22-23 budget. The fiscal integrity of the district needs to be a cornerstone foundational requirement in order for programs designed to improve student outcomes to deliver on their promise. From a practical standpoint, this 22-23 budget is predicated on the 21-22 budget from a personnel perspective. Based on our knowledge of a few unanticipated costs in 21-22 and the predicted ending fund balance, we believe we can continue to provide similar staffing and program levels with few additions. In other words, we are largely status quo. Any additions are largely due to increases in student enrollment or specific grant funds from the state. The anticipated ending fund balance for this 22-23 budget is $10.9 million, or approximately 9.1% of total resources. Contractual increases for salaries and associated payroll costs are reflected throughout the 22-23 proposed budget. Our settled contract agreements with licensed, classified, and administrative staff call for an increase of 2.25% next year. Our contribution to monthly health insurance premiums are slated to increase by $35 a month per employee for 22-23. The recent spike in costs of living and future requests for a living wage from classified employees will likely mean higher costs of living adjustments in future contract settlements. Several proposed changes to the budget are driven by objectives created from input to a prioritization process as part of the district SIA fund application. This called for smaller K-1 class sizes, as well as elementary behavioral and counseling social emotional supports. We were not able to completely implement these changes in 21-22 due to staffing shortages. We plan to slightly improve on these goals in the upcoming budget cycle utilizing these earmarked SIA funds. In the past, the district has indicated intended licensed staffing levels of 24 students to each teacher across the district. Then, some schools have been awarded additional licensed staffing based on needs discussed between school principals and the superintendent. In this budget, we've targeted licensed staffing based on a school level and equitable need. Several licensed staff have been added due to increased enrollment of students at specific schools and our staffing targets. Elementary schools are proposed with a classroom teacher ratio averaging at roughly 18.7 to 1. Middle schools at 21.5 to 1, and high schools at 24.5 to 1. The approximate respective ranges from the fewest to the most are 17 to 1 and 21 to 1 at the elementary level, 20.9 to 1 and 22.7 to 1 at the middle level, 24.7 to 1 at South Albany High School, and 25.5 to 1 at West Albany High School. Staffing ratios at our higher need, higher poverty schools are intentionally lower than at our other schools with the intent of improving equitable outcomes. One school resource officer, SRO, is included in the general fund budget as a contracted service through our partner, the City of Albany. Grant opportunities continue to present themselves to the district through legislative action. These grants require planning, application, monitoring, and reporting on the part of the district, but are mostly non-competitive when they come through the legislature. An example would be the summer school grant the district will utilize in the summer of 2022. The state allocated approximately $1.5 million to the district and required a 25% match. Fortunately, we set aside $500,000 from ESSER fund for summer schools this year. Our required match for these funds is approximately $375,000. This means we'll have a combination of funds totaling nearly $1.9 million for summer school and still maintain $125,000 more in our ESSER budget than we had planned. Another similar grant is the Staff Retention and Recruitment Grant passed by the legislature as House Bill 4030. The district application is not due until May 31st and requires participation in the application with our employee associations, but we are nearly certain to get the grant. It will provide our district with approximately $1.18 million. With these funds, in order to deliver on the spirit of this grant, the district plans to hire a 1.0 recruitment and retention specialist supervised by our Human Resources and Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion departments. This position would focus on diversifying our workforce, recruiting hard-to-fill vacancies, and retention of staff with specific attention to staff of color. While receipt of this grant is likely, the funding has not been included in the proposed budget. When the grant is approved, the board will adopt a resolution accepting the grant and adopt budget appropriations for the grant. Another grant opportunity currently in progress would also add funding to our Preschool Promise Grant. We're seeking an additional grant funding in order to add preschool opportunities at South Shore Elementary. We won't know if we get the award until after the budget is adopted. It is, however, likely we will, and we will use those funds to add preschool classroom for 18 students at no cost to the general fund. Once again, upon successful receipt of the additional funding, the board will adopt a resolution accepting the grant and making appropriations. The district made an important and needed investment in textbooks in 21-22 with the purchase of approximately $2 million for English language arts, world language, and English language development textbooks. The district budgeted approximately $866,000 for textbooks in 21-22. Spent most of those funds on consumable materials and utilized one-time only ESSER funds for the remainder of this purchase. Next year, we will purchase textbooks for mathematics and estimate a similar cost and funding plan using general fund and ESSER funds. In this budget, the district will establish a separate fund for textbooks, the Instructional Support Fund, which will allow for funds to carry over from one year to the next. This will allow us to begin budgeting a consistent amount each year so that resources are available when books are purchased to support subject areas with high textbook costs. A similar issue exists for the district in the area of technology. The district received significant one-time only ESSER funds to offer special support through the COVID pandemic. Some of these funds were used to purchase technology equipment so all students and staff could have portable technology devices during remote learning. The district will need to establish a technology replacement fund in anticipation of the expected lifespan of these devices in order for a one-to-one technology model to remain. We have a start with a budget transfer amount of $100,000, which, while insufficient going forward, is a beginning and is new to the budget for 2022-23. Budget transparency. A common concern expressed by citizens and elected officials relates to budget transparency. This is true not only at the local level, but also statewide, from the legislatively adopted budget to how that translates to meeting individual student needs. Throughout the school year, as district-level administrators met with school administrators, we expressed the need for transparency in regard to staffing levels. Through multiple meetings and diligence on the part of principals, Human Resources Department, and Business Department, we now have a much clearer and more understandable picture and more accurate picture of staffing levels available for the entire district and each school year, and at each school. The Oregon Department of Education, with input from practitioners, establishes a standardized chart of accounts that is used by all school districts in the state. The purpose of the standardized chart was to ensure that data reported by each district was consistent in order to allow for reasonable comparison. In addition, you'll find this document has changed as compared to past GAPS budget documents in relation to the presentation of budgeted funds. This has been done in an effort to make it easier to understand and to find information. Standardized data is submitted to ODE, and information can be accessed through the Data-Based Initiative, also known as the DBI, portion of its website. Data relating to resources and expenditures of every district in the state can be accessed. Comparative reports can also be accessed, as well as information related to student achievement. Financial and student achievement data is used by ODE and the legislature to help determine how dollars are being spent, and also whether student achievement has improved as a result of those expenditures. This information can be accessed via the website, and there's a web address there. Staff have worked diligently to prepare a budget that reflects the board's commitment to provide our community students with high-quality educational opportunities while recognizing the limits of our finances. We're dedicated to delivering effective and innovative services that utilize the district resources as efficiently as possible to implement the board's policies. In addition, I want to thank Janice and Lance Cawley for their good work in putting this document together in partnership with the district. Thank you. Without their expertise and support, I'm not sure how we could have accomplished the task. The 22-23 proposed budget is hereby submitted for your consideration. Sincerely, Rob S. Saxton, Interim Superintendent, Greater Albany Public Schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Saxton. Next up, we have the budget overview presentation by Janice and Lance Colley.
I will start us off, and we just have a quick agenda, and a lot of this we've heard about already at Budget 101, but for the general public who wasn't here, we'd like to review it again, and also to update a few of our assumptions. So we'll be talking again about the assumptions, and then the general fund overview, special revenue funds, other funds, a little bit about the budget document, and then our next steps. So assumptions, as Superintendent Saxton already mentioned, the total general fund resources is $119,862,602. Beginning fund balance estimated at $11,400,000. And if you recall, at our meeting last month, we estimated about $10,400,000. So we went back, we looked at the projected expenditures through year end. We also realized we had some expenditures that we were going to be moving to another fund, and that was going to save us some additional money. So we feel like the 11.4 is a reasonable estimate at this point. State school fund, as you know, it's the second year of the biennium, and so we've increased our revenue and also expect an additional 50 students, and that adds to that too. So the 50 students accounts for about an additional $485,000. Special revenue funds are increasing by $5.7 million. SIA by about 3%. And then there's a significant ESSER carryover that was unappropriated in 21-22, which we are appropriating for 22-23. So, expenditures, we're going to maintain the current service level except for the phase out of COVID-related expenses. Salaries, the 2.25% increase plus a step if eligible. And then PERS rates are unchanged for 22-23. Tier 1 and 2 is 18.67, OPSERP 15.56. PERS UAL is 6.5%. PERS UAL was actually 6% for 21-22, but we felt like in order to ensure we have adequate resources available to pay the PERS debt, we wanted to increase it just a little bit. And that can be adjusted during the year. If in fact the balance is increasing at a higher than anticipated rate, we can lower that back to 6%. Health insurance, superintendent mentioned $40 or a $35 increase of the cap. We built in $40 to be conservative and make sure we covered everything. We rolled the employees up from their existing plan, and so some might choose a more expensive plan, some choose less, but we wanted to make sure we had that more than adequately covered. Okay. And then general fund. So in your budget document, this general fund starts on page 5, and we have well, there are a couple of nice little pie charts before that, but then the general fund resources start on page 5, and it shows our expected increase of 7.15 million over 21-22, and 4.5 million of that is an increase in the state school fund general support. 1.3 million is an increase in property taxes. And a lot of the increase in property taxes is just due to the rising assessed value. And then 1.38 million from other sources. So, pretty basic. And then expenditures start on page 6 and go through page 45 for the general fund. Instruction increased by about 4.3 million, and part of that's contractual salary increases. Part of that is that we will be accounting for some high school athletics in the general fund as opposed to in the student activity fund. And so there's an additional 800,000? I'm sorry.
The 280 from SIA into general fund now, that used to go to the student activity fund.
Right, it's going to general fund. And then support services increased by 970,000. Again, contractual salary increases as well as an increase in insurance premiums for property, liability, casualty insurance. And then transfers increased by 930,000. Part of that was establishing the instructional support and technology replacement funds.
And of that 930, the largest portion, over 800,000, was budgeted in the general fund to be spent on textbooks. Now it's not budgeted in the general fund for textbooks, it's budgeted as a transfer. So we're trying to make that real transparent, set up a new fund for curriculum acquisition, and in the future, you'll see textbooks and curriculum purchased out of the new special revenue fund.
And the new fund number is 292, and it is on page 84 of the document. You'll see a transfer in of $860,000 in there. And the technology replacement fund is Fund 291, and that's on page 83. And you'll see a transfer in there of $100,000. Okay?
So the next section of the budget is the section on special revenue funds. And this is presented differently than it has been in the past. The special revenue funds were grouped into 4 or 5 different groups that didn't make transparent sense to us. And so what we have done is we've provided you with special revenue fund budgets from Fund 201 through Fund 299 in fund number order. Each of those fund groups is a self-balancing set of funds. So Fund 201 will balance, Fund 299 will balance, and then the entire special revenue fund group also balances. The overall increase in the special revenue funds is, as Janice indicated, $5.7 million. We're appropriating more ESSER funds than we did last year, primarily because of the carryover, and a lot of the money was not spent in the current fiscal year, and so there's a larger appropriation next year. There is additional SIA funding that went up about 3%. As Janice indicated, there are 2 new funds in the special revenue fund the instructional support fund, the $860,000 is what was budgeted in the general fund this year, as well as $6,000 in some very minor things that we left in general fund because those were being spent at a school level, not at a district level. $860,000 is not adequate to buy all of your textbooks. As Superintendent Saxton indicated, there will be money appropriated out of ESSER again this year to buy textbooks. But we hope that the administrative staff can put together the long-term spending plan for curriculum acquisition and textbooks, and then transfer the amount of money, once we get through 22-23's ESSER funding, and transfer enough money each year so that you can transfer an average amount and take out the peaks and the valleys in your curriculum expenditures, which this year and next year are roughly $2 million each year. But then they should drop off a little bit, and depending on what textbook adoptions you have district-wide, go through the 7-year cycle. The Technology Replacement Fund, we put $100,000 in there. That is not nearly adequate to provide for your technology needs. You also have some other special revenue funds, including ESSER, that you can continue to purchase some technology. But again, we hope that a long-term technology replacement plan will be put in place so that you can identify how much money needs to be moved to technology annually on an average basis. And again, take the fluctuations out of the cost. So we merely set the fund up this year. The $100,000 is really not a material part of your technology budget going forward, but we wanted to get the fund established so that the board and staff and the budget committee in the future can utilize that, again, in a very transparent way, so you know what you're spending on technology every year as a district-wide program. The decrease in the Student Activity Fund, again, SIA, there was $140,000 for each high school that was provided to the athletic departments for equity. They reduced the fees that used to be charged for athletics. And so we wanted to make sure that the district had a little more oversight over how that $280,000 was spent. And so instead of transferring it to the Student Activity Fund, it will be transferred into the general fund and accounted for in the general fund. So the purchases related to that $280,000 will be very transparent, and the people who have the authority and responsibility for overseeing that will have easy access to the reported expenditures in the future. So obviously, if revenues increase $5.7 million, the expenditures need to balance that, and so those are also increasing by $5.7 million. Title I actually is one of the most significant increases, and that's not an increase in the 22-23 allocation for Title I, but there is $772,000 in carryover from the 21-22 Title I allocation. That money needs to be spent, I think, by September 30th of 2023. So the first $772,000 of Title I expenditures in the next budget will be out of carryover funds, and then the remaining amount will be expended out of the 22-23 allocation. ESSER, the increase in spending is up $1.86 million. That is virtually all ESSER 3 funding. ESSER 1 has been expended, ESSER 2 has been allocated, and most of it will be spent prior to the end of this year. But there is a significant carryover of ESSER 3 funding, including some capital projects that were originally anticipated to be spent by June 30th this year, but those projects are not going to be completed. And so we have carried those over. I know In previous conversations with some of the board members, they wanted to make sure that we weren't spending money twice. And I promise you, we're not. The carryover funding has been clearly articulated at a administrative level, what's in the carryover and what that was already allocated to. But you will see ESSER money spent on technology as well as curriculum in the next fiscal year. Additional SIA funding of $973,000 in the budget. It looks like a lot more than that. We will be doing a supplemental budget this year, next month, to true up this year's SIA account. When it was originally budgeted, it was budgeted about $600,000 lower than what we're actually going to get and spend. And so we will be spending more money next year. It's programmed to have more money allocated by the state, but our budget this year was just not quite accurate when it was put together. And that happens a lot when you don't get your allocation from the state until late May, especially when you're putting your budget together earlier. We're putting it together a little bit later this year, just by virtue of availability. So we think we're a little bit closer. But again, Superintendent Saxton indicated there are a couple of $1 million+ grants that we don't know the amounts for yet. And it's our recommendation that when those get here, that the board accept those and make a budget appropriation resolution increase specifically so you know exactly what you're getting, exactly where it's going. And that's appropriate for special purpose grants to appropriate those when they're received. A slight decrease in IDEA in the budget. We don't have the actual award for IDEA yet, or at least we didn't last week when we finalized these numbers. And again, the decrease in the student activity fund is primarily that $280,000 reduction because we're moving that into the general fund for student activities. The other funds in the budget, beginning on page 90, debt service fund. So the debt service fund was included in the budget primarily to repay general obligation indebtedness, and has been there since your bond issue passed. In the last fiscal year, when the budget was adopted and submitted to the county to levy taxes, there was a number that was inadvertently picked up in error. And so the full amount of taxes for the general obligation bond indebtedness was not submitted to the county. We did have a beginning fund balance in the debt service fund because you can never tell exactly how much you're going to get in taxes. So we're carrying over about $400,000. And at this previous Monday's board meeting, the board approved a $1.1 million interfund loan from the general fund in order to provide adequate funding to the debt service fund to repay your general obligation debt this year in accordance with local budget law. So you don't have a choice but to pay your general obligation debt, but we didn't levy enough money this current fiscal year. So we needed to loan the debt service fund some money, and as included by our bond counsel, the interfund loan of $1.1 million does need to be repaid during the ensuing fiscal year. So we will be providing enough property tax levy to repay the regular bonded indebtedness that is due in 22-23, as well as the $1.1 million in the interfund loan. And those are budgeted as a revenue back in the general fund, and it's budgeted as an expenditure in the debt service fund. Hopefully that goes away, and we don't have to worry about that again, and our tax rates drop back down starting in 23-24 to exactly what we thought they were going to be. The PERS Bond Debt Service Fund increased by $60,000. We sold PERS bonds a number of years ago. Many districts in the state sold PERS bonds. This has been providing significant savings to the district. And I know that that's always a question for people, whether selling taxable bonds to pay PERS indebtedness is a good deal. I would surmise that you have saved millions of dollars. I was not in a position to run a report on that, but you're paying a significantly lower interest rate on your PERS debt than PERS charges for the unfunded actuarial liability. PERS charges their normal rate, which is now 7.2%, and you're paying below 4%. And just like a mortgage, if you reduce your 20-year amortization schedule by 3 percentage points each year, there's significant savings. So it was a good deal. You do still have a few years left on that, and this year's indebtedness increased by $60,000. That was, as Janice indicated in the budget assumptions, we moved the PERS UAL cost that we charge each payroll dollar to 6.5% from 6%. Capital projects funds on pages 91 to 93, decrease of over $22 million. As you would expect, your general obligation bonds, which you issued to provide for school improvements, have been spent down on a schedule. And again, this year, significant capital projects were completed or certainly substantially completed. And we anticipate that the vast majority of the bond fund will be expended. Now, you have a number of different capital projects funds that start on page 91, and a couple of them will be fully expended in this budget year. The new transportation facility, the capital projects should be done. The bond fund, we're appropriating for it to be completely spent out. If it's not, it will certainly be spent out in 23-24. Your construction excise tax is an ongoing fund. You collect between $600,000 and $1 million a year in construction excise taxes. And those will then be expended annually based on programmatic choices that the board makes, and that will be budgeted annually. There was a seismic grant that was fully expended in 2021. There was a Turf for Kids project that was fully expended in 21-22. There is still one more year left on the West Albany High School Turf and Track, the $51,212. This is the final year of the debt on that, so you won't see that in the 23-24 budget. And you've got a fire reconstruction fund that, I will be honest with you, I'm not sure why that wasn't just in a regular capital projects fund and not a new fund set up. But right now, we've spent more money than we've taken in on that, and during the next year, they expect the final repayment for that project work. And so there's not actually any expenditures proposed. We're just looking at offsetting the negative beginning fund balance. So really, capital projects, your significant dollars are in the bus transportation fund and your GO bond fund, which will be, for the most part, fully expended in the next year as far as the capital components go. And the construction excise tax will be your only ongoing capital projects fund with a revenue source. So as far as the format changes in the document, we talked a little bit about that. You've got general fund summaries at the beginning of this, which is always our preference to talk about some of this stuff at a summary level, but there is extensive detail throughout the document regarding what rolls up into those general fund summaries, requirements by function, requirements by object. And the major functions are always, so starting on page 9, areas that we want to concentrate on and compare to previous years. Those are areas where you can look at a higher level. What did we spend in the last couple of years? What did we budget this year? And what are we budgeting next year? The special revenue funds, again, we felt it would be a lot easier for you to read, a lot easier for you to find things if they were just in fund number order. And so each fund is in there. It's identified in the table of contents by the fund type. And, those are the major document changes. We think this allows us to present this to you with more transparency and for you to be able to follow the budget document and really compare things from year to year. And the total budget document information is available at the very back of the document, so. We are happy to answer any questions you might have, and Case can chime in on a few things. And I know somebody brought snacks anticipating that this was going to be a really long meeting, and that scared me a little bit because we weren't anticipating that long a meeting, so let us know.
All right, thank you. Questions? Roger.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. First, just from a 30,000-foot level, and I think I expressed this concern and you've been out looking, we've received many different one-time funds, if you will, to do things. And your thoughts as to whether or not we've taken those funds and created an ongoing operational expense that will outlive those one-time funds we've received. In other words, is there a budget cliff somewhere that we need to be looking at?
I don't think there's a budget cliff at all. I think the administration's done a great job of evaluating what ESSER funds could be used for and making sure that they're used for things that aren't creating ongoing expenses, with the exception of the curriculum/textbook adoption. And utilizing those funds this year and next year will allow you to begin accumulating resources, because obviously curriculum purchases are an ongoing and fairly expensive need for the general fund. But pushing those back a couple of years to allow you to get these funds set up and start moving forward, I think is a great use of those funds and also allows you to stay current on those. The capital projects that are being funded out of those are clearly one-time shots that were not included in the general obligation bond that was passed. So again, I think targeting the one-time resources the way they have been will allow us to do a little bit of pre-planning in the future, but I think it's been very well allocated and consistent with the board priorities.
Okay, I have two more, and I promise that'll be all, if that's okay. So the second would be, we're seeing last year's budget number and then this projected year's budget number. What we're not seeing is actual expenditures to date or to the most recent month, if you will. We're almost through the year. Can I assume that you're adjusting these numbers in the forward years based to a large degree on what we're doing now? Are there areas where the current numbers are not in sync with what we're projecting going forward?
So we look carefully at the year-to-date expenditures in all areas, which is why we are adjusting the insurance, property and casualty insurance. That was the one area that we really saw that in 21, 22 was under budgeted. So we accounted for that in this budget and increased that accordingly.
And so in the financial accounting system, they have year-to-date expenditures as well as encumbered expenditures, which is primarily related to their staff. So your administrative team did yeoman's work putting together where are our current staff, how are they budgeted, are they in the right place? And then once they completed that task, Janice rolled that into the budget system, sent it back, had it re-reviewed. So we're very confident that we have people budgeted in the right places. Now, with 1,000 people, I'm sure that there's one or two positions that are somewhere else. But we're very confident that what we've rolled up are actual costs, actual people. And the revenue is much easier to make sure we've got a good grasp of because, so much of it's through the state school fund formula. So we're very confident in what we're going to get. We should get one more update on the current year. We just got an update on last year, which was positive. So we feel good about the revenue projections and the expenditure side of things.
Okay, and then my last question, and I guess it's a process or a form question. You talked a little bit about anticipated grants coming in, but they're not in the budget.
So the two that Superintendent Saxton talked about in his budget message related to state grants that they're confident that we will get, but not assured, and one of which we don't even have an application in yet, and we didn't want to inflate your budget just from a transparency standpoint. So if you get a budget, or if you get a grant for $1.4 million that allows you to do certain things, you can make a budget appropriation next year when you get that grant, and it will add into the adopted budget. So if you get $1.4 million, we're not even sure where you want to budget that yet. Do you want to budget that in a special revenue fund? Is it better off going into the general fund? We don't know what the state's going to require from a reporting standpoint. And so even though we think those will be available, we didn't want to budget them wrong and then have to come back to you and say, well, wait a minute, we put that in a special revenue fund. It looks like 90% of those are general fund expenditures. We're going to need to move it back there.
Okay. I understand it's not nearly as simple as I thought it might be, which is we are approving at a maximum expenditure level, right?
You're approving a maximum expenditure level once it gets to, the approval standpoint for what we've got. The board has the authority to approve special purpose grants and increases in the existing maximum amount of expenditures up to 10% through a supplemental budget process.
Okay, and it's Superintendent Saxton, it's likely that we will need to go through a supplemental budget process at some point with or without the treating of this grant that we likely will get.
I can tell you we're going through one in June on the current year.
Right, which is something that as you're budgeting, you would, maybe we don't try to avoid it. Maybe it's just a routine course of business.
I've been doing this for 35 years. Maybe 5 of those 35, we didn't at some point reappropriate funds or do a supplemental budget. It's really quite routine given the uncertainty about certain types of fundings. And, if the state's going to give you $1.4 million, you want to spend it, but you want to spend it in a way that you can then provide reporting requirements back to them. And if they say, you get this money, but you've got to put it in a separate fund, then we don't want to budget in the general fund because you're going to have to reappropriate anyway.
I think too, it's important to understand like a couple of the grant funds that I referenced here, 2 of them, are grant funds that where the legislature passed a law and appropriated the dollars and said, school districts are eligible to apply for this as a grant. The money goes to the Oregon Department of Education, and so it would be like the retention and recruitment grant. They notify us that there is an amount of money, $1.18 million, that's available to the district if we apply for the grant. And so as long as we follow the process of application, it's pretty non-competitive. We're going to get the dollars, and then we need to do the reporting. But we haven't even applied for that yet because there's a process, and Oregon Department of Education was late in getting the process out. And so we're not even eligible to apply for that until the end of the month, but we're in the process of writing up what that would be. We're going to get that money, and we have plans about how we would expend it. We're still working on that a little bit, but then we need to account for it through the process that he's outlining.
So that we could talk about this for
Oh, yeah.
hours.
Oh, yeah.
I'll yield. Thank you for the opportunity to ask 3 questions.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking on page 6 at the fuel expenditures, and also it's continued on page 7 as well, fuel and oil is combined. It is being flat with no increases, and that's not realistic. Given our current environment with fuel costs approximately double from last year.
And when we put this together, our projected fuel costs for this year looked like they were going to be lower than the $316,000 that was budgeted. So there is some cost increase built in there. It's not double by any stretch of the imagination. And we didn't have information at the time when we started preparing this to do that.
I guess one of my concerns is we're entering an inflationary period that with no end in sight, at least that I can tell, and they're claiming it's 8.3%, but it sure feels bigger than that. And so I'm concerned that we're not allowing for that likely increase in expenses.
Again, there's not double built in there, but there is some money built in for increases. I think one of the things that you're going to see in the next year, because of some of those things, is some changes also in how some of the maintenance crews utilize those things. I think you're going to see efficiencies that are going to have to be built in, and they may overexpend this part.
Yeah, okay.
Related to that, are there other budget items that would also have similar inflationary stresses on them? Or, and if so, were those included, or was there a percentage given for some of those kinds of things?
So for the most part, utilities and things were rolled over because I don't think we're going to get to what was budgeted last year. Those were some of the areas where there were some increases built in last year. Where we didn't see the big increase, as Janice indicated, was in property and casualty insurance. I think we budgeted about $400,000. I think our actual cost was over $700,000. And a lot of that was due to the fact that we built a lot of buildings in the last few years, and those came on and increased the overall value of the facilities by, over $100 million. And so we did get information directly from the carrier. We reviewed the current invoice. We reviewed the projected increase. And so even though the increase is in the 10 to 12% range, the budget increase is, almost 100%.
But to your point about inflationary things like fuel and electricity and so on, I think it'll be wise for the district to monitor that very closely this year to see how we are doing with our budget, because the budget did seem very generous compared to the current year usage, but inflation is growing at a quick rate. So I think it would be smart just to keep a close eye on that, and if needed, then appropriate some additional funding.
I think the other thing too to remember is 82% of our budget is people. And those things, we already know what they're gonna cost, and that's, very well, we know that we have a 2.25% increase, for example, for employees. And then we know what our health insurance looks like. And then we have other things where we have contracts with fixed costs. And then there are some places where we're not gonna be able to control that, like fuel, so.
Other questions?
Is GAP still using the fueling station with the, okay. So that, in theory, if they time that right and buy that right, it takes a little bit of an edge off of that.
Probably only have a 20,000 gallon tank max. I used to be in the fuel business,
You have.
and my dad helped design that system, so. Just saying.
Right, other questions from the committee?
I got a few.
All right, Eric?
Looking at mental health, specifically the FTEs.
What page you on?
I'm on page 9. So it looks like we have, I'll call it 22 under guidance services. Those are our school counselors.
Under
2120.
2120, under guidance services. I don't know if Lisa or Heather.
That would be school counselors. It could also include social workers.
So fact.
So if you go to page 22, you've got detail on all those things.
Perfect.
And that's that way, for reference, on all of those rolled up numbers, you're going to have detail further back in the document that rolls forward with the larger numbers there.
So we have 21 schools, and the goal is to have a counselor at every school. But I know some of the middle schools and high schools have more than one.
So I believe SIA also includes, I want to say 40 employees, and a number of those are in that same budget area.
So this, thanks.
Learning, I'm just
Nope.
teach.
Yep. So what you see here in the 17, the licensed salaries are counselors. And then you'll see another chunk of counselors and social workers when you go back to the special funds for SIA, because SIA is funding counselors at the elementary level. Now, not every elementary has one. We weren't able to find that many. But I think we have every school in the district, the middle schools have 2 counselors, high schools have 4, have a counselor, full or part-time depending, except I think 3. So we've gotten closer. Yes, those are counselors, but they're not all of them.
And I
A
applaud the
different
efforts
fund.
too, because you have outside
We do.
contracts coming in and supporting that.
Yep, and we have outside contracts. Again, that expenditure you'll see in this special revenue out of SIA as well. And we have special contracts with Trillium, North Albany Wellness, Lynn County Mental Health, Ophelia's Place, and I'm missing one. But again, you'll see that in the special revenue, not in this
So if a
support
school
services.
doesn't have an actual counselor, there's an FTE for it, and there's such a high demand.
Yep.
Perfect, thank you.
So we have an increase in that by 1 this year, hoping that we find some folks, but yes.
Thank
So
you,
this
ma'am.
was a big debate amongst us about what we should do about this. We would like to hire more than one, but we think with good effort and position, we probably will end up with a net +1 for next year, and so that's how we budgeted it, even though we'd like to end up with a net +3. We just don't think that's gonna happen, so to create a real budget, we budgeted +1.
Perfect.
Yeah.
A great thing that staff put together this year was floating subs. It's an expensive, really expensive thing to do. And it's something we probably can never walk away from at this point. I see sub in here quite a few different categories that we're funding. Have we explored the options of hiring full-time staff with PERS and benefits to fill those slots that aren't at the sub-pay level?
We used the term relief subs, so as in the building, you're right, floating, but they are associated with a specific building and go to that school every single day to help fill what is the need there. 1 in elementaries, 2 in middle schools, and 3 in high schools. We weren't able to fill all of those spots either completely. We did not add those to this budget. When you look at another 27 staff, which is what it would be, that tips a budget. Hopefully, we're getting closer to normal next year, that our subs are coming back and the regular need for them. It's a little bit, we're gonna wait and see, and then if we have to have those discussions and come back and talk about it, we will. That's 27 people, 27 licensed staff.
It worked really good, though.
It
It was a
did.
really good thing
Yes.
you guys put together.
It did.
I saw cell towers in here. And the original goal about 6 years ago was when we got these cell towers, that we were gonna put them into the turf fund. So when the turf had to get replaced. I followed the money down, but I'm not sure if it is a,
I think. Yep, I think I can answer just historically. So I think there's cell phone towers, I believe there's 1 or maybe 2, that brings in a revenue of about $33,000 a year. When I look at I think we have 1 more year, and this year would be the last year of a payment for the West Albany turf. The South Albany is done, so there aren't any expenditures for that. I think that's over with. You'll see that $33,000 as a revenue. And it doesn't show as a revenue specifically for that, but you'll see that as a revenue. That's obviously ongoing. And again, I think this year, there is a payment of $51,000, and I think it's the last year for West. And then the turf at both will be
paid off, but
Paid off.
into the future turf fund, because South defaulted and the district ended up paying it off.
the district ended up paying off
Yeah.
both. There is not currently a turf fund for future maintenance or upkeep or replacement of turf at the high schools.
Okay.
Maintenance there is. just not-
For maintenance, like you would typically, but not something, a specific fund that you're going to see that says turf maintenance.
It gets fresh granules and
Yep.
combed every year.
For sure.
Multiple times, yeah.
And then I'll do my last question is PE. So we've been a little shy on PE staffing. Once again, it's very hard to find those individuals. But I don't think we actually have enough FTEs at the same time.
So you'll see PE staffing, again, in 3 places, actually. The general fund. You'll also see we've been the recipient of a PE Peak grant from the state of Oregon. I think this is for several years now. And so that's funding several positions. And then SIA is also funding several positions. We have been in a situation I've never seen in 22 plus years in education, in having a difficult time hiring or finding elementary PE or PE in general. I've never seen that happen before. Elementary music as well. And so we certainly don't have enough FTE in the budget to be able to kind of fully fund at that daily minute count. What we do have in the budget, just to be aware of, we are struggling to staff. So if we could fully staff what we've funded, that would be amazing. For elementary, the PE and music are the way that elementary teachers get their daily prep met. And so it's a critical issue at the elementary level, because that is the only way we contractually meet prep time for teachers.
Yeah. I'm just concerned is that as it is a Division 22 requirement, that we're not actually staffing. We're not actually staffing it.
You're correct.
That's all for me, sir.
I have a question relative to current situation. I heard 82% of the GAP's budget is headcount. Right now, how many headcount are you understaffed in the current year compared to FTEs in the budget?
So how many vacant positions are there? I would defer to Human Resources Director Hugh Zefka.
I didn't come with a number in mind. I'd get that and get it back to you, because I wouldn't want,
I understand.
there's just so much going on. I wouldn't want to say, here's a number, and then, oh my gosh, it's actually this or that. We have hard to fill positions, so I could tell you, easily transportation, we would love more drivers, right? We'll take a handful, easily more. Special programs in our special education department. We are in need of resource teachers. We are in need of classified staff to support and help in our special programs. The master schedules for like classroom teachers and for secondary, their schedules, we got those filled. We were down some, we had some classified staff with 4-year degrees that we worked with to get a license, a restricted or an emergency license to help fill the positions. But I wouldn't count that as we're up. We had people step up to the plate and really do amazing work this year in positions that they weren't planning to do. And so we're no different than other districts, and there are some hot spots and the really harder to fill positions. And I project we'll be there again next year. Like all other districts, we're all looking at that. It's as a state, it is tough right now, so.
We're hoping that we can be really clever in this, with the use of the funds for this, from this grant, 1.18 million that we'll get from the state, and doing some of that recruiting. But other districts are gonna get similar amounts, so we're gonna have to be just more clever than they are.
And we tried really hard to make sure when we were working with HR that if there were vacant positions that we anticipate filling, that those vacant positions were rolled forward at an adequate cost level so that they're incorporated into the budget for next year. So 82% of the budget is for those things. It's very difficult right now to project where that number would end up for this current fiscal year because of some vacancies, but we did make every effort to make sure those were in the budget for next year, so that if they are more clever, we've made appropriations to cover those.
I promise no more, but I have one more. I follow.
Somebody else's question, Roger?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So are there, did you drop vacant positions, current vacant positions for next year's budget?
No, we did not. We made sure to put a line item in that said vacant with a cost associated with that when we rolled it into next year's budget, so that we had an adequate number of FTE and an adequate amount of money budgeted for them to be filled between now and then.
But with that said, it's also important to realize that because we have additional funding, like SIA and ESSER, well, not necessarily ESSER, but we've moved some people around, like with the PE grant and the SIA, so that it's not all in the general fund. The positions are there, but they might be in a different spot. So if it's,
This is where we break the Advil out?
this is where you ask the questions.
So if that's right, and if our occupancy rate or our hire rate is at 95% of the bodies we have in the budget, wouldn't that increase our ending balance by?
And it did.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
This year.
And in the proposed budget reflects what would be fully staffed if all positions were filled.
I would think we're probably at about 99%
Okay.
of those. There are a couple that, haven't been filled for a long time. And again, we made provisions in the general fund, 40 positions in the SIA fund, and 8 positions in high school success. And then, of course, you've got all of your title programs and your IDEA programs for special needs. And we did our best, along with your administrative staff to identify all those areas and get those adequately budgeted. And I think we'll be in good shape from a budget standpoint. I don't know that we'll ever get to 100%.
Yes, sir.
So on page 91, it's under, no question, okay. It shows sale of assets.
Yes,
It's, do we know what that's for?
for the existing transportation facility and property.
Okay, so it's an estimate of what it might be sold for. Okay. On the following page, down near the bottom, page 92, there's a $10 million figure for buildings acquisition.
And about 7 million of that is carryover from the current year on some facilities that will not be completed. We worked with your construction management company and your existing business staff in case to really cash flow out what was going to get done this year
Okay.
and what wasn't, and then what would be
So it's
carried
not
over.
technically new, it's the existing projects we've been moving forward that haven't yet been funded.
Correct. We're going to complete a couple of projects to the tune of about $7 million. And then
Okay.
there's about $3 million in additional resource that will be likely expended next year, but not on projects that are currently underway. And I know that you've got a list of priority projects from the board, and whatever's actually available once those other two projects are done, the board will make a decision on which project that is.
97, there's a $98,485 for Avid. Is that the total expenditure for that program?
On what page?
97, near the bottom.
I can answer that. That is not the total cost, the 98,000 for the program in terms of professional development. That's the cost for the 1.35 staff that are associated with Avid. Those are staff costs.
And I guess my point is, it seems to be a very effective program. And it seems like some additional funding to roll that program out to more locations would be appropriate.
So one of the things to keep in mind, again, this is just the staffing for Avid that comes out of that general fund. We use High School Success, Measure 98, Title IV dollars for professional development, both for Avid as well. So Avid is a program that has multiple funding sources, and this is just one that you're seeing here.
Okay.
I had a question regarding the PERS, and I may have missed it in the presentation either this month or last, but I know that's always been a topic of concern about PERS costs, where they're trending. Can you speak a little bit to that? Are we still concerned about future PERS costs? There was some comments about, I know, it's a joke, but I guess how much are we concerned about future PERS costs? Maybe that's a better question.
You want to take?
Yes.
We're always concerned about future costs. And the next funding estimate, or the next projection, should be coming out based on the December 31st, 2021 valuation. So we will get a feeling in the next few months about what the next biennium will bring. They are very good about giving us a lot of notice for that. And I can't imagine that it's going to go down.
So here's the problem with PERS. Okay, here's one of the problems with PERS. Actuarial valuations set rates for a 2-year period, and they're always based on an odd-numbered year. So we're going into 22, 23 with the same rates that we had in 21, 22. The actuarial valuation will be completed using earnings through December 31st, 21, which were exceptional. So the next actuarial valuation likely will not show much of an increase. because we had exceptional earnings through December 31st, 2021. We all know what's happened. And based on the statutory requirements, rates will go into effect in July of '23 based on December '21. Even if '22 and '23 don't have good earnings. So the time lag is good from the standpoint that we know what our rates are going to be every 2 years. But they really lag, especially in a volatile market. And so the last time this happened, we actually had rates reduced back in '08 or '09 because we had significant earnings. And our rates were reduced in a year when we lost 27%. And so then they had to jump back up dramatically the following 2 years. And so they've tried to take a lot of the volatility out of the actuarial assumptions, but I think the long-term projections are they're going to still go up another 5 or 6% of payroll before they start going down, all things being equal and earnings being at the estimated actuarial rate of 7.2% on the spot every year. The one thing about it, by the time we get some real increases, I think, in the future, you'll be getting closer to paying off your PERS bonds, and that's 6.5% of payroll. And so the one good thing about that in the interim is, that there's a foreseeable drop-off when your PERS debt's paid off. But PERS and insurance are always going to be things that you struggle with financially unless the state's funding keeps up with it.
So there's an 18-month lag between the valuation and then the new rate. So, but isn't it also that Tier 1 particularly, as well as Tier 2, were expensive to the taxpayer, and now we're
Are you talking about us, Roger?
Yes, you're absolutely correct, and I
I'm
was
talking about me, too.
I was at a presentation the other day and it included a little update from PERS, and they said 65% of the actuarial liability is related to Tier 1 retirees, and so they are not allowed to mess with that.
Well, right. A
we all
contract's a contract unless you're trying to cut trees down, as an example.
Correct.
But going forward, that new model is less expensive to the employer, and so over time, we'll get to a more affordable place. It's how much left of the hill do we have to go up before we?
This occasion, lobbyist Ozzie Rose used to say the only way to deal with this is for every red-blooded Oregonian to run over a Tier 1 retiree. So, but please don't.
No.
Well, and truly, I mean, the third tier, OPSERP, is significantly less expensive. And there's a very small unfunded actuarial liability associated with those people. And they are now the majority of the PERS employees. The problem is the unfunded actuarial liability is 65% Tier 1. A significant amount is Tier 2. And, those are the unfunded actuarial liabilities being amortized over a 20 to 30-year time period. And so it's a big number and it's spread over a long period of time. And so really what you're doing is you're paying that UAL for a lot of people who are already retired, and until those people are no longer part of the mortality table.
Much better than running over by your car.
It's a really expensive program, and a lot of those Tier 1 employees who are retired are still under 65. And so, you're looking at a 20 to 25-year lag in the mortality tables.
So look, the rates will go down. The key for us will be to eat our veggies and exercise, so we love to see it.
Question, so I'm on page 110 and 111. If you look at the amount of students we have from back cycle 19 compared to the amount of students we have now or projected to have, and you compare that to the numbers of staff we had in 19 and staff we have now, could we talk to that a little bit? Why the numbers have gone up?
I would quickly point out that with the increase in enrollment, there's also an increase with some of the weighted students, the students with special needs and students that are English language learners. And I think there's additional staffing that goes with those students, but I know.
That's the way our numbers go, don't that change our numbers? Or are these numbers not weighted?
They're not weighted.
It's the actual enrollment, number of students, not the weighted.
So, this is mostly lesson for me, so in the last how many years have these weights started to, I thought they've been in effect for more than 3 or 4 years.
Oh, yeah, no, the weights have been around for a long, long time, but the numbers that are showing in this chart are just the actual attendance figures, the number of students without the weights.
So I guess what I'm looking at, so I see students have supposedly decreased almost 275, and, our staff has increased like almost 60.
So a few things I would speak to that. One, when there was the strategy or the intent for class size to lower in K1, the only way to do that is to increase staff. So your ratios for student to teacher ratios decreased. The ratios that you also saw in the budget in terms of elementary, middle, and high being what they were are decreased to what they were before. So you do need more staff for that. The second thing I would point to is the addition of funds and grant funds that we haven't had before. So the student investment account is one of them. Those are stable funds, and we have 40 plus staff that are paid for out of that fund, and that's been fairly recent in the last few years.
About later 98 as well.
So we're having the ability to have more impact on these students.
And we have funding that we haven't ever had before that allows us to do that. Yeah.
Other questions?
So before we adjourn, we would like to talk about next steps if we could, because a really important component about your review of the budget and our ability to provide you with efficient, accurate answers would be the next meeting is a week from tonight. If you have questions, it's really important if you could email your questions if you can articulate them in an email. Send them to Case and
Lindsay?
Lindsay. And if any of you don't have Lindsay's contact information, we'll certainly make sure you do. But email your questions to them. What we will attempt to do is to compile that list of questions in advance of next week's budget meeting so that we can answer them and so that you can all get the same answer at the same time. That will allow us to, I think, be real efficient in how we answer and also, put us in a position to have meaningful discussions of the entire document as opposed to, getting caught if we don't have an answer to a question that's important to you and we have to do some research on it, we can't do it that night. So if you could do that, send those to.
By what day, Friday?
By when you can.
Okay. right.
We're probably not going to work on them over the weekend. Maybe these guys are. Janice and I probably aren't.
Maybe
So-
Monday would be okay, because that'll give us a couple days to work on it, but that'll give you some time to actually read the document as well. It's Wednesday night right now, so you need a little time.
Okay. Any last call for questions? There's been a few folks that have been a little quiet, so I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity if you had any questions, or you can email them by no later than Monday, and we'll talk about them next week. All right. Seeing none, I don't know if we had any public testimony. Was there any public testimony that was submitted? Okay, and I don't see any public here. So, our next meeting is May 25th. Again, please get your questions in if you have them by no later than Monday. And with that, we are adjourned.